For the next 2 weeks, Julian and I stayed at my friend's house, mainly due to the fact that we need to wait for things to cool off. It would be foolish to make a move of any kind too fast. You see, when I told Jolene about the attempted blood draw, she got real nervous. They want us to know if they can control us, she told me. I couldn't argue. I know those type of people. I know they would end up on their radar at one point or another, but it was far too quick. We had to keep ourselves hidden from view as much as possible. This meant doing things like having everyone wear large hats outside, remaining in human form as much as possible, and limiting our time outside. When I voiced my concern about this, someone's getting eyes on from the tree line, everyone in the room broke out laughing. Jolene and I must have looked totally confused because my friend's wife got up and simply said, "Watch this." She went outside and called the dogs over. I was glad they had finally realized I wasn't a threat after all. Just wished the livestock felt the same way. She gave the command in German, which translates loosely to perimeter sweep. I had to ask since I just don't speak the language. The dogs took off like someone had shoved rockets up their butts. They ran to the tree line and began to circle around the entire compound. Even on 4 legs, this would take me about 20 minutes. Everyone, once in a while, would hear a sound, an odd sound or two. This accompanied one of the group saying something like rabbit or groundhog. After a half hour later, the dogs showed up with blood all over their mouth. A few of them had their trophies dangling from their mouths. Everyone gave the dogs congratulations before letting them go into their little houses to enjoy their catch. I asked, "So what would happen if they found a person?" Without hesitation, one of the guys said, "Like last time?" Hesitantly, I shook my head up and down. "Well, they brought most of him back. We had to shovel up the rest." All I could think was, yikes. At least that took care of the possibility of a peeping Tom. Jolene and I were able to make contact with her mother via an encrypted shortwave radio. Not really sure how they did that, but the kids assured me that it would work and it was untraceable. That was when we found out some disturbing news. It turns out that the monster underworld, had figured out that I had been created and not born an incubus. With this in mind, someone had been raiding our safe houses one by one. Documents of any type had been cleared out, but not much else was taken. Realizing that my blood and tissue samples were at risk, Constantina had everything destroyed. They didn't just burn the samples. They soaked everything in bleach and then burned the entire building down. That lady does not fuck around. It wasn't until I heard the defiance in her voice that I realized how big this game I was in now was. She continued with how she had a loft that I had met her was just torched. Now, they didn't burn the building down, but hitting everything with an M2 World War II blowtorch did the trick just fine. Being that she had to pay for all this showed just how deep her pockets truly were. It didn't hit me fully until someone had tried to go after Selena, though they forgot just how nasty a succubus can be. I remember thinking that she may have had security, but probably didn't use them. She did have that kind of look in her eyes, the eyes of someone who didn't mind getting their hands a little dirty if necessary. We could only talk for about a half an hour, but in that time we set up a time and a location to link up. I wanted to see my family again before I went into hiding, so I asked if that was possible. It's possible, but dangerous. If they had my identity, they would want the rest of my family to test on. It wouldn't be the first time an entire family disappeared to cover up something these people did. I assured her that if they looked into my military record, they would think twice about getting on my bad side. I still hear her almost evil laugh as she heard me say that. I was serious, and anyone in the room knew it too. With time running out, we set up a drop car that Jolene and I could get to. We had to move in the shadows now. Not very easy with the facial recognition software out there, though now we could adjust our features enough, just enough to fool it, at least long enough to get us out. By the way, that hurts. A lot. Even holding it hurts. It would be a few more days before the vehicle was ready. Being a shadow is a real pain in the ass sometimes, especially when you're a high priority target. You see, later that night in our regular meeting, one of the tech-savvy kids showed us that the price on my head, not to mention Jolene's, had gone up considerably. Hell, the price on the capture contracts had gone up across the board. He said, "They only want to do this when they're looking for information." He looked right in my eyes. "You are worth a literal fortune." He smirked a little and replied with, "Only someone truly desperate or stupid would go after a contract with the high priority payout like this." Now this was more a power move to get everyone a little more at ease, but I should have figured it wouldn't work. At least not with this crowd. Jolene grabbed me by the arm, and when I looked at her, she had a lot of worry in her eyes. She was concerned that hunters would be showing up soon, and she said, "I don't think we can stay here much longer." One of the ladies quickly responded, "You couldn't be much safer than right here." She smiled at Jolene, and I think it helped a little, though she didn't let go of my arm for the entire meeting. That night I made sure to wrap her up with my wings and tail just to help her feel safe. Truth be told, I didn't get much sleep that night. My senses were on high alert and my PTSD was kicking in big time. It was the first time that it happened since my transformation, and guess what? It still sucks. The next day I was helping put a few items away when I heard the command given to the dogs again. I didn't think anything of it until I heard screaming and a shot being fired. We all ran to the vehicles, grabbed our weapons, and bolted to the sound. When we got there, the dogs were wagging their tails, or at least most of them. One dog was on the ground next to a pair of ripped-up bodies. We congratulated the dogs and gave the command again so they would continue the sweep. They hesitated, but they took off. Then probably hesitated because another dog, wasn't dead. She was treated, pasted on the back of a John Deere Gator, and brought back to the house while the rest of us searched the bodies. They were only armed with a pistol each and had cameras set up for long range. From inspection, one guy didn't even get a chance to pull his pistol before the dogs tore his frickin' throat out. The other guy got that one shot off before getting torn to pieces, literally torn from neck to nuts. Remind me never to piss those mutts off. Now for the good news. The dogs will be fine in about a week, or maybe 2. The bad news is that they have our location. When we looked through the memory card of the cameras, we found out that they were taking pictures of everybody here. It seems as though they didn't quite remember what I looked like, so they took pictures of everyone, hoping to figure it out. I knew then that it was definitely time to leave. Good thing neither of those two knew anything about nature photography, since they would have known to mask their scent and to keep the lens from reflecting light. That's what gave away their position, and our host had the dogs sent out to investigate. Jolene and I packed up our bags with everything we would need. We knew that the vehicle would be waiting for us in another day and a half maximum, meaning we would be spending at least one night camping while we waited. This wouldn't be an issue as far as gear goes. If there was one thing my buddy had plenty of, was camping gear. We wouldn't fly part of the way, land, and then hike into a totally different direction to make sure that we were not being followed. At this point, we just can't be too careful. We said our goodbyes, and I gave them some of my cash as thanks to help out. Almost had to force my buddy to take it, though, as I put it in the same position as a couple of minutes earlier. I was handed a satellite phone that had been altered so that it wasn't possible to track. That is, as long as we kept the damn thing off when we weren't using it and kept the call under 2 minutes. I wasn't too keen about the idea of carrying around a piece of tech, but they told me I would be fine. This way, you can always get a hold of us if you're in a pinch, they told me. I gave them a look that said, and vice versa, too. There was no confusion on what we were saying. We both knew we might need each other down the road. Getting on the balcony, Jolene and I stripped down and began to transform. Damn, I forgot how hot she was in the moonlight. I saw the look in her eye, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing, but that sort of thing would have to wait. We said our final farewells before we spread out our wings and took off. The takeoff was a little jarring with the added weight, but flight was peaceful. I had to keep most of my attention on the horizon or the compass. If I started looking at Jolene's elegant body as she gracefully glided through the moonlight, I would suddenly start losing my aerodynamics. Jolene suddenly lost altitude more than once during the flight as she lost focus during the flight as well. We only had to fly for about 3 hours, but by the end, our wings were just killing us as we hadn't used them in a while. Once on the ground, we changed back into human, put on some loose clothing, put our packs on, and started our long walk. Though the forest was fairly open and we could see easily at night, it would still take us until morning to reach our destination. The sun was already up when we reached the location next to a lake. I knew this time of year the bugs would be bad, but holy shit. It seemed like everything that had an antennae wanted to become a bother to us, and that's being nice. The only way we were able to get them away for a while was to take a dip in the lake. It was early, so no one would see us do a little skinny dip to wash the sweat off. Afterwards, I set up the tent while Jolene tried to make some breakfast. I say try because her bushcraft skills turned out to be non-existent. We ended up doing everything together, from gathering wood to building a fire to making breakfast. I tried not to give her any grief for being such a city girl, but one or two quips might have slipped out, just a little. Once we were done with breakfast, I realized that the succubus DNA had an additional side effect. I wasn't nearly as tired as I thought. In fact, I could have packed up and kept going. Instead, I made some coffee, pulled out some large towels, and insisted on bringing, and we sat looking over the lake. It must look really strange with two succubi sitting in the morning sun drinking their morning coffee. While I was sitting there, I was thinking about the situation and how we would disappear. I knew we would have to stay off the grid. That was easy. But how would a city girl handle life without modern conveniences? I was going to ask as I finished my coffee, but it turned out that Jolene was just thinking about how we could pass the time. I did discover something interesting about the forest. Tree branches are sometimes at the perfect height so you can grab on and give you some good leverage. We slept good that night and stepped out early the next morning, at least tried to. I don't know if it was part of nature or our monster forms, or maybe she was in heat, but damn, woman, you're gonna break it! Life is a succubus, I guess. We got to the vehicle not long after it had dropped off. I knew that because I could feel the heat off the engine as I walked around to inspect it. One of the kids had given me one of those bug detectors just in case. Thankfully, the car was clean. On the passenger seat, there was a CD with the big old letters "Play Me" on it. We put it in as we started moving. It was a set of instructions on it and different additions to the car. Everything from how to flip over the license plates work to where the hidden weapons were, and even had a section on how to set up dual zone climate controls. A bit too thorough for my taste, but I appreciated the attention to detail. It was a long drive to my parents' house. Jolene slept most of the way while I listened to talk radio. Current events made me cringe a little. Oh, who am I kidding? It was a lot. But it was good to know what was going on in the world. We only stopped for fuel and food, though that made us find out something else about succubus psychology, or physiology, I should say. Succubus may be very efficient with the food we eat, but fast food and high-calorie snacks like chocolate don't remain in the body for long. Maybe it has something to do with maintaining a low BMI so that we can fly. Just a theory at this point, but, uh-oh, I gotta pull over again. When I pulled in, I saw my father first. He was outside working like normal. He always joked saying, "I'm retired, what else am I gonna do?" He just saw the car, and I could see the puzzled look on his face as he didn't recognize it, but soon noticed me. I went in, gave him a big hug as Mom came out. I gave her a hug too and introduced Jolene to him. They were a bit put back that I introduced her as my fiancée, not to mention I was a bit taller. My mother was almost in tears as she hugged me. We went inside and I tried to hide the fact that my dad kept looking at me weird. We talked for a bit and I didn't take long before she called up my siblings and told them that I was engaged. They must have raced to the house because I was amazed they got there so fast. Most of my nieces and nephews were there too. When my brother arrived, he thought it would be funny by saying, "You're engaged?" Then turned to Jolene and asking, "So, when's the baby due?" Had to give him a good smack on the arm for that one. Jolene was a little overwhelmed by such a large family since she only had her mother and her sisters around. Yes, I know she has more, but she never gets to see them. Also, she might as well be an only child since she was born about 30 years behind her elder sister. We spent a lot of time hanging out with each other in our little family groups. Of course, the kids wanted to go and play as soon after they got there and wanted us to join them from time to time. Teenagers, being teenagers, didn't want to just sit and visit for too long, but did their best, and I give them credit for that. After too long, we had dinner, and the kids started falling asleep. Before everybody started to leave, I brought up that I would be going away for a while. At this point, only the older kids were awake along with the adults, so everybody present would be able to handle what I was about to tell them. A few of my siblings cut me off asking if I was doing mercenary work or something. They know how I feel about that, so I think they were just trying to break the tension a little bit. I told them to sit down and shut up. This is important. Jolene and I started to explain how she was born a succubus and now I'm an incubus. How she was connected to the monster underworld and how me changing had made us a target. There was a lot of rolled eyes and snide remarks given, but my dad was silent. He seemed to know I wasn't lying. He ended up telling everyone to be quiet and for me to prove your story to everyone. Jolene and I looked at each other and turned back to everyone else. "Promise not to scream," I said. "You'll wake up the kids." We began to disrobe, and when we got to the pants, there was a lot of yelling about how they didn't need to see this. I got a little aggravated, and since I had already unbuckled my belt, I said, "Fine, but you owe me a new pair of jeans." FYI, ripping through denim hurts a little bit. We began to transform slowly, and the room was silent except for tearing cloth. Though the jeans hurt my leg, during the rest of the transformation had become painless over time. As our wings began to unfurl and our tails became apparent, a few backed up in their seats. Though I'm not sure if it was the wings, the tail, the increase in mass, or the fact that my head was now bumping up against the ceiling. So much so that I had to turn my head a little bit. When we were done, we just stood there, and there were a couple of "holy shit" and "what the fuck?" But all they could do was take in the news rather well. It didn't take long before they all began to look a bit closer and reached out to touch a little bit. I had to pull back because this was just weird. I know what they did. To prove that their psyche that they were not completely delusional. I did let them touch my wings, but I had to wonder, what is with the fascination with my tail? We answered questions for a while and then told everybody that we would change back, but really need to eat since the transformation takes so many calories. Thankfully, there was plenty of food in the house, though not by the time we were done. I told them that since I was being hunted, it would be a good thing if my identity was secret, though in truth that would not last much longer. I told them that I would check in from time to time to see how things were doing, though more importantly, it was to make sure they do not try to take our kids. This includes their blood, organs, anything. Jolene put it very succinctly. These people don't think like you or I. They will slaughter entire nations to get what they want as long as their own clan is protected. If they are ever confronted by one of these, just ask them if they want to keep their bloodline intact. They should remember who and what they are hunting. Though I would prefer to leave them smiling and laughing, this is just the situation we're in. After everyone left, we went to sleep ourselves. The next morning we had breakfast, and there was a somber tone to the room. Though everyone tried to cheer each other up, it was a short reprieve from what the reality of things was. Jolene and I stayed through the morning, but had to leave right after lunch. We couldn't risk sticking around too long. Mom got some pictures of us together so that she could show the family and friends. I really wanted to visit them too, but time was of the essence at this point. It broke my heart to put that house in my rearview mirror. Jolene tried to comfort me as best she could. God, I love this woman. I held her close the entire ride to our link-up site. We stopped short of the pickup site about half a mile or so and ate a few high-protein bars. This was just in case things got, shall we say, sporting. We pulled in really slow, seeing a figure next to a big black car. When we pulled in, I could see a man was in a driver's uniform. He looked at us when we got out, and he tipped his hat. He introduced himself and said he was here to pick us up. Jolene took a step back after looking at him in the eye and rapidly transformed. I was confused at the sudden outburst as the driver put his hands up screaming, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, miss! I'm just here to deliver you. That's it." Jolene was fully transformed, now screaming, "I know all of my drivers. I don't know you." She raised her arms as though she was ready to fight. He stepped back into the car door saying, "You don't know me." He then pointed at me, "But he does." I looked at him confused as I instinctively began to transform. He said that, though I lost a lot of weight since then, I suddenly recognized him. I put up my hand to stop Jolene and then took her hand. "I do know him. We were on that job together," I said to her. I looked back at him. Sure enough, it was the wolf from the headhunting job, though now he was thin and fit. As I calmed down, I went back to human again. I shook his hand and said, "Good to see you. You're looking good." He smiled and replied, "You too." Jolene went back to human and looked at him with suspicion. That was until her sister climbed out of the opposite side of the car and said, "Satiated yet?" She asked that with a bit of a grin on her face. Jolene looked pissed and cursed her out for a little bit because she just ruined another set of clothes that she liked. She climbed into the car while I helped the wolf with the few belongings we had left. I asked him how he ended up being our chauffeur. He grinned and said, "Well, you see, since you saved my ass out there, I owed you one, and your mother-in-law can be quite persuasive." I looked at him confused. "I'm not married." Throwing the bag back in the trunk, he said, "Yet." I continued with, "This simple job can be a bit dangerous for you. I mean, it's not like you're ready to change in a hurry or anything." His smirk was enough to give anyone pause. "Well, I'm not," he said as he closed the trunk and looked around. At first, all I could see was a few buildings and one or two vans and trucks. That is until I looked a little closer. Each vehicle had a few obese personnel in them. I did a full 360, and as I looked at one of the vans, the door opened up, and there was two fully changed wolves in the back, waving at me. A serious what the fuck moment if there ever was one. The wolf put up a hand to my shoulder and said, "They heard about what you did for me out there. Not only did you save me from that whatever the hell it really was, but that got us enough money for our entire pack to move and start over fresh." I gave him a grin and a nod and then shook his hand. I gave the wolves a little wave and we got in the car. Roxanne was in the back helping Jolene get some new clothes on. It must have been a genetic guy thing, because watching her change in the seat while we were driving made me almost start ripping my clothes as well. I kept it together, but Roxanne wanted to see if she could push my limits. The heavy flirting, along with flashing herself accidentally, didn't push my limits, but it did push my buttons. Seriously, it's my fiance's sister. I know I'm now an incubus, but give me a break already. Part of me wanted to pleasure her, while other parts of me want to hurt her. Thankfully, Jolene saw how pissed off I looked on my face and dismissed the other active parts of me. I'm sure those two will have it out one day, but that's not today. Roxanne finally calmed down and began to lay everything out for us. There was a plane waiting for us, about 3 hours from where we were. Our former car was being removed and driven to another direction, just in case. Once we got to the airport, there'll be clothes, supplies, and money waiting for us. I told her I took care of the money and showed her a wad of cash. Her jaw opened and turned to Jolene, saying, "Marry this one." When Jolene told her we were already engaged, I don't know if Roxanne was about to kiss her or kill her. In any case, the money would be in different denominations, along with fake passports, birth certificates, and other documents. This would allow us to go anywhere in the world. It would be best if even we didn't know where we were going. The transponder has been removed from the plane, and it's equipped with all sorts of countermeasures. While she spoke, I was hoping that Jolene knew how to fly a plane, because all I had was some simulator time. Being stuck in a small confined area with a pair of succubus is a trying experience for anyone. I couldn't even open a window due to the risk of a passing camera, so I decided to drink. And I don't drink. Issue was that my new incubus body doesn't get drunk from more than a few seconds. Even tried upending a bottle, but that only worked for about 5 minutes at most. The ladies thought it was hysterical and kept teasing. These girls need a better hobby, I thought to myself. It got so bad that I thought about climbing up on the roof and then climbing into the front with the wolf. When we got to the lone airstrip, there was both Selena and her mother waiting. Their time together was short, but they were almost giddy when Jolene mentioned the engagement. I was busy getting a crash course on avionics from one of the wolf's friends. Turns out, Jolene didn't know how to fly either. Oh, this was going to be interesting. Suddenly here, "We got trouble!" With what I could see were lines of vehicles coming full bore up the road. They mistakenly didn't cross the airfield to head straight at us. I thought that there would be no way for us to get off the ground fast enough before they were on top of us. Then suddenly, the front vehicle spun out while the second one was flipped onto its side. In seconds, the convoy was being mauled by the entire pack of werewolves. They were not kidding around, as I could see that one guy get his arm bitten clean off, while another one got pulled out of the seat and thrown like one of those bad CGI movie clips. As I ran to the plane, the former pilot had already started the engines. Jolene gave her mother a hug and ran to the plane. I simply put up my hand to my shoulder as to say thank you. As I ran to the steps, as I got them up, I could see the ladies getting in the car. All I thought is, I hope they get out of this, because boy, were we in deep now. Following the pilot's instructions, we taxied down the runway, buckling ourselves in while we went. I was unable to get turned around, and just as I lined up, I heard the howl, and I saw all the wolves disappear into the woodline. I whispered to myself, "Thanks, guys," right before I throttled up and headed down the runway. I made sure to keep the yoke down for a little longer than I was told to make sure that we could climb fast. The few vehicles that were still operational were trying to cut us off, and I'll admit my heart was beating so hard it drowned out the sound of the turbines. As they reached the tarmac and began to turn towards us, I pulled back and up as hard as we could. Maybe not close enough to Hollywood, but I wasn't complaining. As we got some altitude, I began to turn south. I kept it below 10,000 feet, for about 10 minutes and then dropped below 2,000 feet. At that altitude, the radar couldn't pick us up until we were right on top of them. The kicker is, we weren't going south after all. Once down below 2,000 feet, we turned west, then dropped another 1,000 feet and headed for the coast. After a few hours, we were over the ocean. I had to get really low now and then turn north. I had looked at the map, and given all the old and unused airfields in North America, I knew we only had one shot to get us where we wanted to, and that was the northern part of British Columbia, or Yukon if the fuel holds. Thankfully, it was a calm trip. Found the airstrip just fine. I was so nervous with the landing, and it came down too easy. Let's just say it's a good thing that that plane has good brakes on it, or there wouldn't be a plane anymore. I was able to get it turned around all right before shutting everything down. I think I'll stick with just my own wings for a while. That was a pucker factor of over 5,000. Now there we were, in the middle of nowhere with almost no fuel and hundreds of miles of nothing between us and the next person alive. Well, at least we would be safe. We set up camp using the plane as a house for now. It was like the first night we were out camping, just a bit colder. Turns out Jolene really doesn't like the cold much. Here I am stoking the fire without a shirt, and she's wrapped up in a coat and a blanket. It made me laugh a little bit before saying, "Don't worry, you'll get used to it." Well, sort of. She would eventually go outside with less and less on, but never fully acclimatized to it. She enjoyed our nightly flights, but wouldn't stay out for too long. She never did want to go hunting with me, though it was a surprise to come back empty-handed, and she had a salmon on the grill cooking it up. Turns out those talons come in really handy. Good thing too, because the constant transformations burned a lot of calories. The truth of the matter is, if you know what you're doing in the deep wilderness, it has far more food, and more than enough food, than you're ever going to need. We decided to stay in monster form to keep from burning through our supplies. It also helped with hunting when you can get bird's eye view of things that aren't used to being hunted from the sky. A full-grown bull moose could feed 2 people for a month easily. Now, thankfully, we didn't have to go without modern conveniences. I'm sure Jolene was happy to have a toilet on board, even though the toilet paper would run out eventually. The solar generator allowed us to pick up radio stations and even download a few videos. Though after a long day of hunting, fishing, trapping, and foraging, there was only one thing my body wanted to do. Doesn't this body come with an off switch? Not that I mind too much, but even I was able to keep myself under control and wasn't only a monster out there. The noises we made at night, I'm surprised there was any game to hunt for 50 kilometers in any direction. We were there for about a month when we started to get our first surprise. We were both in human form as I was collecting some firewood, and I suddenly heard Jolene's voice call for me, though it sounded off for some reason. I thought this was strange, as I had a 2-way radio clipped to my pants. I looked in the direction that I heard her voice, and there wasn't anything I could see at first. Then I heard her voice from another direction, and I turned that way, and I could see the slightest bit of movement. I reached for my pistol on my right hand as my radio cracked to life. "Did you just yell for me?" Jolene asked. I dropped the wood I was holding in my left arm and reached for the radio, at the same time drawing the pistol. "No," I answered plainly. I had begun to transform just a little bit. This would enhance my senses, but not start changing my body too much. Again, I could hear her voice, but then also my parents. One from the right, one from the left. I could still hear Jolene's voice coming from the direction she was not in. The radio sounded again. "Are you playing games? Because I can hear you." It cut off mid-sentence. Is usually not something to worry about, but with everything going on, everything in me was on high alert. Then I heard Jolene's voice again. "Are you trying to mimic my mother's voice? You're not doing a very good job." I keyed the mic. Listen very closely. I want you to take out your pistol and replace the magazine with that fun mag. Do you understand? There was a short pause. Yes, but why? She asked me. I keyed the mic again. Just do it and take the safety off. Though not good with firearms, everyone knows that it's now time to worry. Get back to the plane. Stay on alert. I will get to you as soon as possible. I turned and began to walk normally. I replaced my magazine as I walked, and I put the radio away and drew them my knife. I knew it wouldn't be much good against what was coming, but, why the hell not? I decided to walk back down the tarmac. If they wanted to try something, they would have to come out into the open. I could see Jolene standing by the plane, confused at what was going on. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, and I saw one of them. It was the skinwalker. The fucker was stalking my woman. That skinny bastard had no idea who he was fucking with. It was maybe 100 feet from the plane as Jolene's eyes widened and she screamed. I spun around and my fears were confirmed. Skinwalkers, and lots of them. Most of them ran, almost human-like, at me, while others crawled quickly like something from a horror movie. I almost laughed as I raised my pistol and began shooting. If there was one thing that will really quickly stop a skinny, it's fire. Or, in a pinch, tracer rounds. They're coated with magnesium and burn out pretty quick, though even a few seconds of burn time is enough to drop one of these things. As I fired, dropping more to the ground, I could hear Jolene shooting as well. I figured she was taking out the ones behind me, when in fact, she was covering my flanks. Then I heard her scream again. I spun around and saw her mostly transformed with a skinny on her back, and 3 more running and clawing at her. I used the last of my tracer rounds to shoot the crawlers, since they were almost at my feet. When I looked up, I could see the skinny bastard trying to rip off one of her wings. He made the worst mistake you can, going after an incubus's mate. I went into a rage and was actually running on all fours as fast as I could. I closed the distance in a matter of seconds, and it looked up as I was almost on top of it. I swear it had a true "oh shit" look on his face as I drove my hands first into its upper chest, knocking him off Jolene. It flailed as it began to rip its arms and legs off. I raised it off the ground and crushed its neck, and it went limp. I dropped it and looked around to see there was even more. Jolene was trying to stand as she rubbed the joint on her wing. I was sure it would heal, but what I was going to do these skinnies wouldn't. They just kept coming. Must have been 40 or 50 of these damn things. I was still in a rage and my body began moving on its own. I dove over Jolene and landed on one, crushing its spine through its neck. If I had lunged, I would grab them out of the air and simply rip them in half. I didn't have claws like Jolene, who eventually got into the fight as well. So I had to rely on my old military training, mostly jiu-jitsu. This meant breaking joints, ripping tendons, and even using my tail to strike, and in one case, crushing one's rib cage, pretty much cutting it in half. The fight was over in a couple of minutes as the few remaining ones darted into the woodline. That really didn't know who they were messing with. We can see perfectly in the night. Jolene and I took to the air and followed them back to their nest. Boy, can they move fast when they want to. It wasn't too long before they stopped in their nest. We could see a few other ones moving around, and it was time to end this. I dropped in first, landing on 2 of them, 1 for each foot, crushing them solid between myself and the rocks. As I started to go to town on the rest of them, a few more thought they would be smart and come up behind me. Bad idea, because succubi have claws. Jolene came down and took out 2 more. She must have been pissed about almost losing a wing, because I've never seen her rip into anything like that before. The sheer animalistic rage and vigor that came from her mirrored my own. As the last few tried to charge at us, the sky opened up and began to pour down in buckets. The last skinny tried to crawl away. I jumped in front of it and it began to back up. Jolene slashed at it with her talons and it screamed. I reached down and grabbed its wrist, picking it up and slamming it into the ground. As I picked it up again, Jolene grabbed its legs and together we ripped it clean in half. We looked around for others, but didn't see or hear any more. We both turned and looked at each other, both of us breathing heavy, with the rain coming down, cleaning the blood off that which covered us, revealing our nearly naked bodies to each other. We stared into each other's eyes with that mad rush of murderous adrenaline still coursing through our veins. In that moment, we came together and made passionate love, standing over the bodies of our victims. I began to realize why humans fear us so much. We truly are dangerous. As I stood there in the thralls of passion with my woman, I wondered something. Life has gotten much more exciting since I found Jolene. Could I keep getting even more excitement as we go? I couldn't wait to see what would happen next. The next day, we exited the woods to rediscover our home away from home was pretty much trashed. The fight had destroyed a bunch of equipment, and there were bodies and body parts all over the place. Didn't mind much, as I figured they would leave soon enough anyway. I had begun reading the flight manuals and instructions during my downtime. For the time being, all I needed was some fuel if we were to get the hell out of here. Looking at the map, I noticed the town 1,010 kilometers to our southeast that had a functioning airport. At least we knew they would have some fuel there, so we made plans to get our hands on the fuel that we needed. First thing though, we had a lot of bodies to burn, and it was time to get to it. Now, it wouldn't matter if you're an incubus or a horny teenager. After smelling burning bodies all day, you are not in the mood for intimate contact for at least several days. We cleaned everything up, and we were mostly back to where we were before the skinny attack. Though I could tell that the whole thing had put Jolene on edge. She kept checking the wood line as though another monster was going to come running out. Didn't see a monster, but a grizzly would make a nice meal. Though after thinking about it, we had enough to eat. There was enough killing for a while, and I'm just not in the mood for it anyway. I was ready to just get to another location so we wouldn't have to worry about any more of those things showing up. That night we buttoned up the plane and got ready to fly. Since the plane wasn't going to make it, we would have to fly to the runway, purchase our fuel, and fly back with the drums. A difficult task, but doable. The flight to the airfield was uneventful and landed just outside the airfield, so we were not spotted. We transformed, put on appropriate clothing, and walked to the airfield and talked to the first person we saw. He freaked out seeing unfamiliar people in his town unnoticed. We inquired about the fuel he was willing to sell us some, though he would not stop asking us questions. We tried to be vague with our answers as he got us 2 barrels and we got out the paperwork. The questioning got so bad that I could see Jolene was just about getting to her wit's end with this guy. Even his wife, that showed up right around the time the total was given, began to ask, "So, who are you 2 pretty folks?" I tried to be nice, saying, "Just a couple passing through, no one to be concerned with." The husband was kind of put back and was continuing to pry as he handed the bill. "So, could we at least get the name? I don't like to, call someone just Mr." I simply put out a wad of cash, which was at least 10 times more than the cost of fuel, placed on the table. "Are you sure names are important, sir?" He looked at the cash, then looked at me and grinned. "No, mister, they're not." I gave him a small nod and slid the cash over to him. He picked up and quickly opened it up and checked for any marker. After confirming it was a real thing, he got a big smile on his face. "Is there anything else we can help you with?" I said, "Nope." But thankfully, Jolene spoke up. "Can we get a hand pump if you have one?" I was confused at the question. but the wife disappeared for a few seconds and came back with a used hand crank pump. I didn't know that you needed one to get the tanks filled with fuel, but then again, it does stand to reason. I just kind of figured we would need a funnel, not a pump. We took our items and started to walk away. Neither of us thought about the fact that we had just lifted 65-gallon barrels and put them on our shoulders and just started walking away like it's nothing. If you don't know, that's 520 pounds. 236 kilos, not counting the weight of the barrel itself. We didn't think about it until we were well on the way back, and now we tried to be stealthy, but now we really have to go. We flew into the camp around dawn and started filling up right away. Once filled up, we got everything ready to leave. Then I lined up to take off. I looked at Jolene and she seemed a little sad to be leaving. Yet, when she looked down at the bloodstains on the tarmac, I could tell she was ready to leave some bad memories behind. I throttled up and we got moving. This time, we simply headed south and headed back towards the U.S. Our reasoning is because it's easier to hide a needle in a stack of needles than in a haystack. At least that was the plan, but we all know about the best laid plans. We were still an hour from the border when the radio came to life. Attention inbound aircraft, you had entered restricted United States airspace. A quick glance at our location on the radar and I knew this was bullshit. Even Jolene looked confused. Unidentified aircraft, you are to deviate to heading 127. We are coming up beside you to escort. I looked out the window and sure enough, one had pulled up beside me. I looked on the radar and the other one was directly behind me. As I looked at Jolene, asked, why do they want us to follow them? I mean, we're not even in the U.S. yet. I took another look at the F-16 that was right outside my window. It was wrong. The markings, they just weren't right, at least if you knew what to look for. It looked as though they were hastily put on, then the aircraft took off without any ordnance. I tried to stay stoic as I looked, but the pilot had his visor down. I could see the concern. After he spoke, unidentified aircraft, you are to change heading to 127 and drop to 10,000 feet. This is your last warning. If you do not comply, you will be fired upon. I turned to Jolene and said, go get the bags ready. She ran to the back and threw a few more items into the 2 rucksacks I had put together and closed them up. It only took a minute and she came up and said, done. Just as I got out of my seat, I flipped off the other pilot, raised the stick so that the nose was about 5 degrees, and flipped on the autopilot. Just as the fighter fell back, Jolene and I grabbed our packs and opened the door and looked out upon the world. I still remember her turning to me and saying, all this time I thought you were kidding. I chuckled a little and grasped the pack tightly, remembering how I had told her how scary it is to jump without wings, and then jumped. For someone who used to hate heights, this was a big step. In actuality, I didn't know if it was going to work, but we needed a surefire way to escape. I rolled over as I fell and freaked out a little that I didn't see Jolene. That was until I saw the rear fighter fire a volley into the plane. She jumped out quickly and seemed to try and catch up with me. I began to transform, and it was almost impossible to get my wings to open enough to keep from becoming a stain on the ground. I began to panic a little as the ground began to get closer and closer and closer. Then I shoved my arms into the straps, front-loading the pack, and now could use my free hands to hold my wings open as the force of the wind was forcing them back. It worked enough to start slowing me down, though I was still running out of time to get gliding. I turned my head to see how Jolene was doing. She can really be a show-off sometimes. Maybe it's because she was much lighter than me, but she had already gotten herself into a glide path and was soaring majestically. I was able to right myself about 50 feet from the treetops. As I kept going along the trees, I suddenly remembered why I didn't like heights. Jolene and I were able to make our way into the trees and land. We basically had to slide our way down the trees to get to the ground. Before we did, I looked up at the plane that we had just left. One of the engines was smoking as the other ones just kept flying. I grinned at the fact that neither of the fighters had followed us down. Maybe they thought that we had committed suicide when they didn't see any chutes. It wasn't time to question that, though. When we got down, I noticed that Jolene had been shot. It was a grazing hit, but it was enough that she needed some medical care. I made sure that we had medical supplies with us, so patching her up was easy. I was more than a little rattled by it as I wrapped up her leg, but she was just angry. I can't remember ever hearing her use so many expletives before. Thankfully, she was able to walk because we needed to get some distance between us and whoever was going to be searching for us. I tried to joke a little bit about how she got shot and still escaped by jumping. Maybe you're related to D.B. Cooper or something. She did grin since she had jumped out without $750,000 in her possession. She replied, maybe, but let's never, ever do that again. I smiled and gave her a kiss on the cheek before we started to walk. I wonder if someone up there has a twisted sense of humor, because with the supplies we had, along with my bushcraft skills, it should have been an uneventful walk to the next location. Jolene and I walked for a few days before we stopped to make camp. Not to say we didn't take breaks, but I know that simple FLIR search optics, thermals, would pick up a campfire body heat instantly. We did sleep and eat, but we did stay static no longer than we had to. We stayed in monster form simply due to the fact that our legs were longer this way and we could move faster. It was strange to see such fauna around that didn't seem to even care that we were walking around. A few times I thought about pouncing on something like a turkey or a deer, but I didn't want to waste the time. You see, the first night we were out there, we could see helicopters searching for us. For a while, I thought they would get Jolene's blood from the trees and just come down and begin to track us that way. But if they had, then we have been hearing dogs by the second night. Thankfully, that didn't happen. The dense canopy was also our saving grace. The thermals just couldn't punch through it very well, and hiding in caves makes it nearly impossible to track anyone. By the end of the third day, we had exhausted almost all of our food, and we really needed a good night's rest. Jolene may not have much knowledge about bushcraft, but she learned really quick. By the time we had gotten the fire going and gathered enough wood to last the night, she had already made a bed area for us and was cooking dinner. I had to stand and stare a little bit because she looked so cute. My little succubus, frying up the last of our MREs, squatted next to the fire with her tail helping to keep her up and her lovely wings folded back. Even though we had been on the move for so long, her hair was still long and pretty, and her skin glistened from the remaining sweat on her body. She noticed me staring and got a good look at her mountain man coming in with logs over his shoulder. We both smiled, and I sat down to eat dinner. That night, she fell asleep on top of me, curled up with her tail wrapped around herself. I wanted to wrap my rings around her, but they just don't bend that way. In the middle of the night, with the fire almost out, Jolene jumped to her feet, her claws fully extended, scratching me a little as she got up. I jumped up as well, looking for dangers as Jolene backed up against the tree we were next to and got in a defensive posture. I didn't see anything and asked Jolene what was wrong. She began to calm down and said, "It must have been a dream." I looked at her puzzled. I thought there were skinnies coming at us. I pulled her close and held her until she calmed down and drifted back to sleep. I guess they messed her up worse than I thought. We got moving the next day after I pissed out the fire. We searched for food as we went. Thankfully, we found a river teeming with salmon. This surprised me because I thought we were further from the coast and it was the wrong time of year, but hell, I wasn't complaining. This was a massive score for us since we were out of food. Jolene had an easy time catching them since her talons would pierce through the fish itself and drag it out. I had to either try to scoop them out or use a spear. Either way, we had food to last us a few days at least. While we feasted, both of us suddenly overwhelmed by a horrible stench in the air. It was enough that both of us just stopped eating. We looked at each other and Jolene asked, "Is that you?" I responded, "No, I would have claimed that one." We looked around and the smell kept coming stronger. Suddenly, Jolene grabbed my shoulder and turned me around. There, standing in the middle of the river, was the biggest and hairiest man I had ever seen. So much that it was like he was wearing a full ghillie suit. That's when I noticed there was more than one. About a half a dozen walked out of the woods and into the river. Then, almost in unison, they sat down in the water nearly covering all of them. Then, with a sudden rush, all of them stood up with fish almost in every hand. It was strange, but it was also strange that the smell was almost gone. Guess they just needed a bath. They then walked over as we just looked on in awe. I had always heard about the Sasquatch, but I had never truly seen one. The stories were true. These guys were big. Not particularly broad, mind you, but definitely taller than the average human. Their limbs seemed a bit long, even for their height. They had their hands similar to mine, and their feet matched the stories. It was more than a little weird having a group slowly walk up holding still thrashing fish. Jolene held my arm as they got within 20 feet. I was tensing up, expecting a fight. To my surprise, they just squatted or sat down in front of us and began to eat. It was almost like the movies you see with the gorillas in Africa, though a bit more civilized, I guess. I'm having a little trouble putting into words since it was so surreal. As we ate, the younger ones became bolder and bolder as they began to get curious. I know they'd never seen our kind before, and the fact that we ate similar to them must have made them think we were just like them, just with less fur. And wings, of course. We carried no firearms except the pistol in my pack, though they did look a little curious at my knife and when I picked it up to cut off another piece of fish. As I began to cut into the fish, they seemed to relax. I made sure to put it down once I was done using it so they didn't get any more nervous. Jolene didn't speak as we ate with our new friends. She made sure to stay close to me as I still had an advantage in size compared to them. As I was working on the last piece of fish, one of the young ones had gotten behind us and caressed Jolene's tail. "Seriously, people, what is up with the tail? I don't understand that. Is everyone obsessed with our frickin' tails?" Jolene jumped and snapped her tail back, hitting the young one in the face. Not hard, but it did make him stagger back. We both jumped up, and I was ready to protect her as the young one backed off, and the rest of them made weird sounds. It was kind of a mix of a hoot, a gasp, and a snort. Jolene and I looked at the group, thinking it was a call to action. It didn't take long to realize that they were laughing at the young one for doing something stupid and getting smacked for it. Even the youngest ones made similar noises. With that, the tensions lowered considerably as Jolene and I laughed too. After everyone was done, Jolene decided she wanted to wash up. She dunked herself into the river and moved around a little bit in order to get all the stink off. I followed her in. When we both stood up, the Squatch were staring. Not only that, but they were sniffing the air. We saw this and smelled ourselves, thinking we stunk too, but it was actually quite the opposite. It hadn't occurred to me in all this time that the forest had masked our scent over time. Now it was like our aroma was intoxicating and they couldn't get enough. Then we realized something that made Jolene stand behind me in fear. The males were all pointing at us, and not with their hands. The females began to move around as though they really had to urinate. I remember softly saying, "Oh shit." As they began to move in our direction, I started stepping back as the group made their way into the water. I was in a ready stance as the younger ones seemed to be drawn faster than the others. Then the one I figured was the pack leader grabbed the younger ones by the shoulder and began to pull them back. He motioned to our packs with his head in a way that said, in a kind of raspy, almost childlike pronunciation, "Leave now." We took this opportunity and ran to our packs and got the hell out of there. This time, since it was close to sunset, we only ran until it was dark, and then we climbed up the nearest ledge and took to the skies. I had tried to avoid this since the change of being randomly spotted is much higher, but we had to make some distance. As it turns out, the Squatch have their own way of things that I don't fully understand, though just in case they are territorial, I would like to make as much distance as possible and stay the hell out of their territory. I was reminded on the flight of what the Squatch had been having an issue with. Jolene flew in front of me a couple times, and then I suddenly had to deal with additional drag. Annoying, but worth it. We flew until we could see the lights of the town in the distance. We figured this would be a good place to stay while we figured out our next move. It had been weeks since we had gone back to our human forms. It turned out to be an issue. It hurt to change back. A lot. At one point, I gave Jolene one of my shirts to bite down on so that she could finish pulling her wings and tail back in. When she was done, I pulled out a flask and gave her the last of my grain alcohol that was in it. Really strong stuff, and she put it down in a matter of seconds. I would find out why in a minute. It felt like I was trying to force twice as much bone marrow into my bones when they were already full. Now think of that for the entire body. Emphasis on the back where my wings and tail are. Also, my head had to retract those pseudo horns I had. I thought that hurt, and then I thought about what Jolene had to go through, and she had full horns. Ouch. Once reformed, we spent some time getting dressed and ready to go into town. I was glad we had an extra set of clothes and shoes, or we would have been hurting even worse. With our sunglasses on, we strolled into town and found a motel to stay in. I said screw it and got one with a hot tub in it. Jolene had mentioned how much she likes them. Jolene went to the room while I went down the street to a cell phone store and got myself a burner phone. Got one with internet so we could order some food. After so many weeks on the move, I thought it'd be a nice reprieve to just relax. When I showed up in the room, Jolene was already in a hot tub, letting the jet soothe her body. I smiled at the beautiful sight for a moment, and then I got online and ordered some chow. By the time the Asian cuisine arrived, I had already started to partake in the hot tub, and had almost forgot about the food until the knock on the door. I grabbed some cash and opened the door. Shockingly, the delivery woman on the other side almost dropped the bags when I opened the door. Appreciate the compliment, lady, but I was more interested in the food at this point. As I was paying, the aroma of the food had reached Jolene because she ran up from behind me and grabbed the bags. I paid for the meal and gave the girl a big tip. As I went to close the door, she stood there staring at me and Jolene as she stood behind me. I tried to say something serious as I asked her, "Is there something else?" After a moment, she snapped back to reality and looked me in the eye, for once. Oh no, that was all. Thank you." With that, I slowly closed the door and almost busted out laughing as she moved her head to try to get one last look. I went to the food, which Jolene had already started to inhale. Jolene said between bites, "I'm surprised she didn't invite her in. Or why didn't you invite her in?" Confused, I said, "But I'm engaged to you. What am I supposed to say? Come on in if you want me to eat you too?" Jolene swallowed, turned to me and go, "That would work." She said seriously. I was trying to put down a mouthful before speaking again, although this did give me a minute to think. I said without even looking at her, "If you're interested in dessert, then go get her. She's probably still in the parking lot." Surprisingly, Jolene grabbed a towel and ran out the door, and I was just standing there shoveling food into my face, trying to process what the hell was going on. Maybe we were out in the forest too long. A few minutes later, she came back alone. I grinned and said, "No luck?" Jolene had a sheepish grin and retorted, "She just has to finish her shift first." I laughed a little bit as I kind of choked on the food some. Once we ate, I went out for a bottle or two to fully relax. Jolene joined me and chose a pretty good bottle of wine. I guess her being several decades older than me has its perks. I got a few mixers and some strong stuff to go with it. It was about 10 at night, and we had already gotten ourselves rather loose on the liquor, along with other activities, when we heard another knock at the door. I didn't want to move, so Jolene got up and staggered to the door. She looked through the peephole, and then I heard her open the door saying, "Welcome back. Who is this?" My ears perked up, and I looked at the two young ladies as they walked in the room. I waved hi because my legs were jelly at the moment. They were both young Asian ladies, I'm guessing around 20, 25 years old. In truth, I'm not good at guessing the ages, never was. It wasn't even the alcohol that made me wonder if this is really happening. Jolene told me later that for a succubus, this is normal practice, and that she kind of had a thing for Asian girls. Woman, you are seriously full of surprises. I didn't partake in the conversation much. It never really was my strong suit. But Jolene just seemed to be happy talking to the females for a change. I remember thinking that maybe it was due to having sisters. After about a half an hour, my head was clearing and the girls were beginning to get tipsy. None of them had stopped drinking since the girls walked in. I figured that was my time to get out and stepped out of the tub. Suddenly realized that the alcohol was still in me. I leaned up against the wall. Jolene got things started by saying, "Could one of you go help towel him off?" I'll spare you the details and just say the two called into work the next morning, or I should say out of work the next morning, due to not being able to stand up very well. No, I will not take full credit for that. While the girls slept, I was looking through ways to get across the country. Driving would be good, but I'm not sure a road trip would be best. Flying is an option, but most likely we would get identified and detained. So that left us with hitchhike or train. Since we had spent a couple of months in the wood, looks like we were taking the train. I made sure to several notes and several different airlines just in case. I went to tell Jolene and I got a quick reminder why you don't wake a horny succubus. First she reached up like she was going to rip out my throat, and then she pulls me into her chest. Once she wraps her legs around, ring the bell because game is on. We ended up leaving a couple days later. Our two visitors didn't want us to leave, but that's how it has to be. We had to promise that if we were ever in the area again, we'd contact them again. Jolene started to get creepy as she licked her lips, watching them walk away, and then it hit me. "So, how much energy did you siphon off those two anyway?" I asked her. "Not much," she said as we started walking to the train station. We didn't talk much on the way to the station, or once we settled in for the long trip. We spent the majority of the trip reading or playing cards. I was thankful for the fake passports as it got us through customs without any problem. At night, Jolene and I liked stalking around the cabin, looking around. It was funny to bust couples getting some train nookie. Jolene was funny saying things like, "You'll get a better angle if you raise her leg," or "Slow down before you, oh, too late." It was just fun to mess with them. Though the best one was busting kids sneaking items when they thought they were protected by the cover of the night. Though catching one of the kids smoking wasn't difficult. When you have vision like ours, the cherry from the cigarette is like a flare. I almost found out that due to my heightened senses, smoking was painful. Damn. And I used to like a good cigar. Emphasis on good cigar. We had to try not to have our private time due to the chance that we might accidentally transform in front of people. American trains don't have their rooms like the European trains do. We had to switch our trains in the American Southwest. Jolene was bored, so we decided to spend some time out before we continued. We went out in the middle of nowhere and got ourselves a motel. From there, we went out and found a place to take off from and transformed. It felt really good to change again, and it really felt good to fly again. Although I knew that the feeling was really, really good would come later. No pun intended. We were flying around and saw a campsite in the middle of nowhere, so we went to investigate. The campers were laughing and having a blast, at least for now. As we glided silently through the night sky, Jolene and I saw something making its way to the camp. At first, it seemed like a large wounded dog, but when we got closer, we could see something was wrong. This thing had the body of a shaved dog with spidery legs sticking out of it. Not all the legs seemed right as it staggered its way to the campsite. We watched it begin to circle the camp, being very careful not to get into the light of the fire. I thought that maybe this was one of those susceptible to fire as well, but this time I didn't have a pistol full of tracers. A few minutes later, I could see one of the guys get up and walk away from the fire, presumably to take a piss. He was on the other side of the fire from the creature, but it didn't take long for the creature to start rushing around to get a shot at this kid. As it began to charge at this unsuspecting kid, I swooped down and intercepted it. The kid saw it coming about 30 feet away and screamed like a little bitch as he turned around to run away. The creature was almost on top of him as I came down and grabbed it by a couple of its spidery legs and took off. At that speed, it wasn't difficult to gain altitude again. Everyone at the camp stood up and took notice as the kid ran back, screaming, piss rolling down his leg and his schlong hanging out. As he got back to the safety of the camp, the others almost immediately started ripping him for being a pussy. This wouldn't say that they knew what was going on, wrestling just over their heads. I heard them laughing until this thing let out the most sickening howl. It was so loud it hurt my ears. In a quick decision, I decided to drop this thing right where it would hurt. I let go and covered my ears due to the pain. It screamed the entire way down, and the kids were all looking out until the body landed on the fire. They all jumped back as this thing began to flail around in the fire. Then suddenly it burst into flames and burned into a myriad of colors. I was in too much pain to stick around, so I turned back towards our clothes. On the way out, I heard someone yell something in Spanish like chupacabra and gracias. We made it back to our clothes in the vehicle, but I was in no shape to drive. In fact, Jolene had to carry me inside. We didn't have any true fun until the next morning. Turns out that ruptured eardrums will kind of take you out of the mood. Though being a dumbass in front of your woman will keep her seduced for days. I don't know how to keep coming across stuff that's so weird like this, but I'm already done with this area. We took an earlier train east the next day. It took a while, but we finally got to the Gulf of Mexico. We purchased a boat and outfitted it with all we need to get us to our next destination, which would be Europe eventually. It will take us a long time to get across the ocean, though since we are moving with the wind, it won't take us nearly as long as it would if we were going the other direction, i.e. west. You know, I was half expecting to see mermaids circling our boat, considering all the creatures or monsters or cryptid activity that we've had since this entire thing began. Nope. In reality, I spent most of my time searching online to see what we would be walking into. Also, to see what the hell we had been dealing with over the past few weeks. From what I could dig up, the elves stay in the shadows as much as possible. They don't like exposing themselves as elves, so it is very difficult to find one. From the reports I received, they would kill you once you discovered to keep their existence a secret from the general public. Very few have ever said they have seen one and got away clean. A few got away, but not in one piece. When researching the werewolves, it was very difficult to separate fact from fiction. Luckily, I had Jolene there to help me figure this out. She already knew how the werewolves operated, so she was able to bring me into the real information rather quickly. Finding out that they need to gorge themselves with enough biomass to transform confused me. Jolene and I didn't do that, even though the transformation itself burns a lot of calories. Jolene joked by mentioning how we were burning up a lot of calories through other rigorous activities. I just looked at her and asked, "Rigorous?" She simply responded in the way of that Zorro movie. "Yes, very rigorous." I just say that the research was put on hold for a while. Note to self, never let a boat simply drift off course. By the time I got eyes back onto the water, we were heading straight at an island. Thankfully, there was plenty of time to correct our heading. I was starting to look up vampires when Jolene stopped me and filled me in on how they operate. Finding out they really don't have superhuman abilities beyond having night vision and really fast reflexes. No, they can't fly. They don't have wings. Turns out their culture is very complex with different clans, masters, and castes, and is very difficult to break from. When I took a step back, I realized that is why those two on the headhunt were with me before. They must have been either trying to prove themselves or trying to start their own clan. One of the things of note is that vampire females are much more dominant because there are so few of them. Turns out it's difficult to turn a female into a vampire for reasons unknown to anyone besides a vampire. However, more females are born into vampire society than males. Now, you would think this would balance things out, but instead the females turn many men and have them serve them. Just slaves, I guess. Ghouls, I think they call them. I found this quite interesting, since I figured that's what succubus do. Given Jolene and her sisters, looks like it would be very easy to bewitch a large number of men. I have to remember to ask her mother about this next time I see her. As I was researching skinwalkers and skinny people to see what I had tangled with in the Canadian woods, in truth, I can't figure out what the hell they were. I mean, they acted like skinwalkers, but from what I read, skinwalkers don't live in groups like that. Also, I thought skinnies were supposed to be really strong as well as fast. The group we obliterated was fast for sure, but they were not nearly as strong as one would think. I'm still trying to make sense of the whole thing. Maybe this is just a one-off kind of thing, or maybe they were changing their tactics considering they might have realized what they were facing. Regardless, I would never have to face them again. At least I'd rather not. Jolene still jumps if I pull on her wings without warning. She's getting better over time, but I know from experience that sort of thing just never really goes away. You just have to find a way to deal with it. Although I did find out that if we do regular bullets, just might be fine. If they were skinny people, that some people might think that the standard ball round should work fine. If they were, then the smoke I saw rising from them was just the tracer burning off, from the magnesium. Then again, better safe than sorry if you're facing one of these things, so always have a couple tracers. One thing I found out about looking up the Sasquatch is there's a lot of bullshit to comb through to find anything of real note. It isn't until we find some pictures that actually look like the Squatch we encountered that we even give the article a second glance. The literature is limited at best, and most of them note that the Squatch are very, very skittish when it comes to humans. I discussed this with Jolene, and the only thing she could come up with was that we didn't look human when they saw us. In fact, we didn't look like anything they had seen before, so we guessed their curiosity had just kind of gotten the better of them when we interacted with them. Almost all the literature talks about how the Squatch stink. Really, I mean really, really bad. Jolene and I were confused about this because the Squatch definitely did not smell good. But the smell didn't make me want to cry from sheer vulgarity. Our best guess was that since the Squatch had just taken a dip in the river, much of the smell was taken away. Also, the smell of raw fish is really strong in the air that day. It must have covered up the majority of their wonderful aroma. One thing that did stick out, due to lack of mention, was Squatch Young. We discussed how they might have been the first ones to witness young Sasquatch ever. One thing's for sure, the adolescents are just as susceptible to compulsion as humans. Speaking of which, Jolene and I, we talked about those young ladies from the hotel. I do hope they don't get disappeared just for being with the two of us. Doubt we will ever see them again anytime soon. However, if those that are chasing us found out that we shared time with the ladies, then the ladies might just be taken. Let's just hope those two don't get a phone call saying that they need a blood draw, and that's the end of it. When you're dealing with the shadows, you never really know what you're going to get. Now, before we reached the Gulf, we did have a quick run-in with the whatever in the hell that thing was. Now that I had thought about that, was that a chupacabra? But I don't know, it didn't match any of the descriptions. The chupa is usually described as a hairless dog with long skinny appendages. However, it never mentions spidery-like legs like that thing had. I looked around that there are stories of different animals with those spider legs, but nothing matches. The hell did I drop in the fire? What surprised me about the whole thing was the fact that those legs didn't swing back and strike me. They kind of tried, though maybe the thing was just too baffled at the situation to really put up a fight. However, I would rather not have to touch it again. Ugh. It took me a long time to feel clean after that, and Jolene didn't even want to touch me unless I had at least 4 showers. When I'm not doing research, I'm up on the deck fishing or catching some rays. Jolene is usually spread on the deck most days. She has started going below deck to read when the sun gets too intense. She does join me for some fishing, but doesn't really like to sit there holding a pole for no reason. I'm sure there's a joke in there, but I can't think of one at the moment. The one thing I'm glad of is on the boat there is scuba gear, and enough for 3 people. There's even a compressor for refills. I've been teaching Jolene how to scuba dive, even though she doesn't really know how to swim all that well. I try not to bring it up because she's a little embarrassed about it. It didn't take long for her to get the feel for it and getting addicted to diving. Though I had to remind her that she couldn't just compulsively dive without taking a day to recover. Last thing I needed for her was to get the bends way the hell out here. We've been at sea for about 2 weeks now, and we've been making great time. Even with all the stops to dive, we will be arriving at our next destination in 2, maybe 3 weeks. We need to go at least that long remaining in our human form. After the difficulty we had turning back before, we agreed to only change if we had to. It would be really difficult to get around unnoticed with wings and a tail. I just looked up and Jolene just rolled over on the deck. Maybe it's time to stop writing and see if she needs some help putting some of that oil on.